can get started for our last of our regional sessions. The Halfway There crew, which is myself, Lauren, and Edwina, has been around the world over the last 2 days, but we are now back in at least our home country of the United States and North America generally to do our Western Hemisphere session. So we're really excited for this. All the sessions have been really good, really insightful, and so we're hoping to build on that with our last session. So, to briefly introduce us, I mentioned us. I'm Ben Rogers. I'm an assistant professor at Boston College, co-organizers with Lauren and Edwina right here, and then special shout out to Bailey, who's also been part of our team, but is on maternity leave, very excitingly. But this team right here has been putting on the opening plenary, which you may have attended on Monday, as well as these regional sessions. If you missed the plenary session and you still want to see it, you have been sent the links to the recordings in your reminder emails, but we'll also be sending that out afterwards. That included really great sessions on Dissertation from Margaret Luciano, on Crafting Your Impact by Ali Gabriel, and then a really exciting, live podcast featuring some great scholars. So we today will be shifting over into the last little bit, and we're going to start off in the first 45 minutes with a panel from this great team of scholars who I will introduce in just a second. And they're going to be talking about lots of very interesting things based on the questions that you sent in beforehand. And then afterwards, we're going to split into roundtable breakout sessions. There's going to be 2 rounds of that. And we will introduce how that's going to work later on. But I want to jump right into the panel if everyone is ready to roll with that. So I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, and I did not warn them about this, but I'm going to introduce them and then ask them to briefly describe in 1 or 2 sentences what it is that they study, just to sort of get everyone warmed up as much as possible. So I'm going to start off with Nitya Chawla, assistant professor in the Work and Organizations Department at the Carlson School of Management in the University of Minnesota. Nitya, can you share a little bit about what it is you study?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for participating. I'm excited to be here. I study 3 big buckets of things. I study employees' diverse experiences, understanding how their non-work identities spill over to influence their experiences and their interpersonal interactions at work. Tied to that, I also look at employees' well-being experiences and how they spend time in their non-work when they're not working. And then finally, I also consider the experiences of new labor market entrants, specifically those who are graduating seniors and joining the workforce for the very first time.
Awesome. Thank you. We're really excited to have you here. Next up is Dave Arena, Assistant Professor of Management at the University of Texas at Arlington. Dave, could you introduce what it is that you study a little bit?
Sure. Excited to be here. Welcome, everyone. Most of my research falls at the intersection of identity work and work-family issues. I do a lot of my work understanding how we bring parts of our out-of-work selves into the workplace. I've recently taken up an effort in looking at employee success. As someone who does a lot of identity work in multiple different communities, I find that we know a lot about the bad stuff and not a lot about the good stuff. So I've pivoted a lot of my work towards understanding how people navigate marginalization, different barriers within the workplace context.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Next up, we have Rui Zhong, Assistant Professor in Organizational Behavior at the Smeal College of Business and at Penn State. Rui, could you share a little bit about your research?
Hi, everybody. I just want to make sure everybody hear me okay. Okay, good. So thanks so much for coming to the session, and thanks so much for having me here. So most of our research focuses on negative workplace phenomena, like negative behaviors like gossip, abusive situation, ostracism. I also pay attention to negative emotions. Recently, I'm being pretty focused on the notion of homesickness. So even though I tend to focus on a negative workplace phenomenon, my research tends to shed a more positive light on those negative phenomena. For example, I study the potential functions of gossiping at work. So that's why I identify myself as a positive scholar on negative phenomena.
I love that. Thanks for joining us. And then I believe Tosin joined the Zoom, if I saw correctly, but taking a little bit of leap of faith that I'm going to introduce Tosin Nwade, Assistant Professor of OBHR at the University of Toronto. Tosin, I was having the panelists just share a very quick 1 or 2 sentences about what it is that they study.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm happy to be here. My name's Tosin. I would generally describe my work at the intersection of intergroup relations, stigma, authenticity, and inequality. My work in general looks at things like racial inequity, racial inequality, racial stratification, and basically how we contribute to that with our attitudes and behaviors, both in expected and unexpected ways. So yeah, happy to be here, and thanks for joining us.
All right, thank you. We're really excited to have this great panel, and so I am going to stop sharing my screen and we will spotlight our great panelists so that you can watch them all during the panel. But to sort of kick things off, so I'm going to be facilitating things based on the questions that were sent in beforehand by our attendees. And just to sort of set the stage for our panelists, if you're not familiar, the audience is largely second, third, or maybe some fourth year PhD students who are just kind of exiting the prelim comps phase of their program and are starting to enter in, that murky second half of the PhD program, whether that's dissertating, eventually job market, or just any or all of the above. And so I wanted to start off with what is often sort of the big milestone of that second half as people are leaving, and that is the dissertation. And so, you're leaving prelims, you're leaving comps, and now you're thinking about like, all right, I have to do this thing called a dissertation. What is that? How do I even approach it? What's a committee? Where do I start? Who do I talk to? So I'm going to leave it very wide open and ask, whether that's specific to your institution or your own experience, what was your experience navigating, how you approach your dissertation? Was it just another project? Was it your magnum opus? Was it one essay versus 3 essays? Whatever tips you can do as people are starting to think about approaching their dissertation. I'm going to start off by going to Nitya, if you can kick us off with your experiences there. And then the other panelists, if you want to jump in after Nitya shares her grand insights.
Oh, okay. Thank you. In addition to not telling us that we're going to share our bios, Ben also did not inform us. He's keeping us on our toes, which I appreciate. The dissertation, it is really scary. I remember, so at Arizona, we passed, we got through comps at the end of our 3rd year, which is a little later than other institutions. And I just remember being like, oh my God, I'm at my dissertation stage. I don't know if I feel ready. What is like, I feel like this does have to be the biggest, baddest thing I've ever done in my life. And that just, it caused a lot of anxiety. And so I think what was helpful in, to your point, Ben, we didn't do the 3 essay dissertation at Arizona. I also, I was at A&M University, Texas A&M University before Minnesota. That's also a place where we didn't really do the 3 essay dissertation. There are so many benefits to a 3 essay dissertation. It's just a little different from my personal training. And so I think for me that actually did help bring down the stress a little bit because it kind of felt like what do I want to be known as when I go on the job market? And I think boiling it down to that provided a lot of clarity for me. And then I think the other part of it was like, do I want to do something risky? And my dissertation was on the experiences of sexism while searching for a job. So the answer to that question was yes, I actually do want to do something pretty out there, pretty introspective in some ways, and something that might raise a couple of eyebrows along the way. I will say, and I think what is really, really important, especially as you're thinking about dissertation topics, is like, it's unlikely that your first idea is the main idea that you go with. I actually came up with maybe 3 different dissertation ideas. And And what was helpful to me was like I wrote the hook for each of those dissertation ideas. So I actually wrote the first 3-4 pages of what it would look like, sent them over to my advisor, and walked through them together, right? And that actually really helped, because in doing that, I realized some of those ideas were not the best ideas, and they, nothing came out of some of those ideas. Other ideas came out of some of those ideas. But it takes time, and I think that that's okay. Like, enjoy the process of taking time for this, and recognize that there is no race to be won, in the sense of like the first idea is like your most brilliant idea and you go all the way through with it. So those are some big picture thoughts for me, and I'll pass it on to the other panelists.
Yeah, and for me, I guess the first decision that I needed to make was to decide whether to go for bold, novel ideas versus topic that are kind of continuation of my existing research. So my initial stage was I was so ambitious. My supervisor also encouraged me to be very ambitious. So I proposed that I decided to focus on a topic that was completely different from my existing work on gossip, on aggressive behavior, on mistreatment. And I adapted the 3 essays and 3 papers model. And the 3 papers I proposed were completely new. But down the road, as I got deeper into the dissertation process, I totally regretted my decision, because I realized, because the ultimate goal for me is essentially to publish all 3 papers. And there was no way for me to produce 3 high quality new papers. So due to the time constraint, due to the timeline, because we needed to defend my proposal before I got into the job market, so time was pretty limited. As a result, after the discussion with my supervisor, I decided to switch back to my original topic, which was more like continuation of my original research and topic, which was about gossip, abuse situation kind of stuff. And so that's one decision I had to make. I guess that's also one first decision that students, like incoming students, also need to make, to decide between risking topic, new topic, versus, continuation of your existing research. And I always feel like dissertation should be used as a way to facilitate your research. I mean, the goal is to publish your dissertation. So I tended to be pretty pragmatic, pretty practical. So I kind of put together 3 projects that are different stages. But I know it may not be doable at a certain institution. I know certain institutions prefer to have brand new research projects, like brand new ideas. Whereas at my institution, people tend to be more flexible in that regard. Yeah, that's essentially my experience. Also, incoming students also need to decide between using like 1 paper format versus 3 paper formats. I did a 3 paper format because I wanted to have more project which could be used for my tenure clock purposes.
Yeah, I wanna co-sign Nitya's anxiety. I think that,
Yeah.
Once you get post prelims, post comps, your sort of day to day as a doctoral student changes a lot. You're not taking classes anymore, and you might find yourself, like I did, with like big swaths of time, which is, I would kill for that today, but it's a little disarming to have so much agency over what you spend your time on. And there's a lot of pressure to spend time like doing really deep thinking about your dissertation. I was really anxious about what I wanted to do. I oscillated pretty frequently between wanting to do something that was related to what I was doing already, something that was completely different. I was also my advisor's first student, so we were sort of navigating this process together, which was a lot of fun. But if I were to do it all again, I think we got into a cycle of getting really excited about the idea as a whole. What I presented to my committee was I was doing way too much. I had like 16 surveys over the course of 4 months. Like I was like moving mountains. And I remember sitting in my committee meeting with Kurt Krager, who looked at my slide and said, "You're not going to do this. Like, this is not going to happen." And I was like a little windswept, but then looked at it and was like, yeah, this was kind of wild. Like, I don't know why I let myself get to this position. And it was just sort of a learning process. I mean, my committee was very gentle with me, and I ended up doing something really cool around signaling sexual orientation in the workplace, which is something that I was really interested in, but no one was really doing research on. Something that we haven't talked about yet that I think is really important is you need to dedicate some time into thinking about who's going to be on your committee. And the easy answer is not who is the most prestigious researcher in your department, who coined the theory that you're using. There's a lot more sort of intention that should really go into those conversations. And it should be an honest conversation that you have with your dissertation advisor or your co-chairs. I talked to my advisor, Kristen, very early on. Her husband is in my department. That was one person, very easy, but I had no idea who the other two people were going to be. And I remember her asking me very vividly something that I ask my students now when they come with a dissertation idea. What do you want them to do? Do you need a theory person? Do you need a methods person? Do you need someone to challenge you on your ideas? And that's how I sort of led through who the other person in my department was going to be and who the external person was going to be also. So having those conversations early on and having those conversations honestly with your advisor. Maybe the person you think might be a great committee member is kind of a jerk in committee meetings, and you might not know that until you talk to people about it. But I would always recommend thinking about who you want on your squad pretty early on in your process.
I think there's been so much great advice. I'll just chime in here a little bit with my experience. So my dissertation was also not the greatest experience in hindsight. I had various projects that I worked on up to that point that just didn't necessarily pan out. So there was a lot of pressure for the dissertation to be like the really, really big thing, like it needed to pan out, right? And I had an idea and we collected data for it and it looked great. We were excited, it was awesome. And we collected study 2 and like none of the results replicated. And it was devastating. Like, what do I do now? And so even now, as I tell people that story, I call it dissertation 1.0, and I had to pivot to dissertation 2.0 in spite of all of the investment that I made with the question and the theory and the design, basically everything. It's like, yeah, no, like spurious effects. So that was very, very, very disappointing, but in hindsight, it's probably good to find that earlier in the process than later in the process. So I pivoted to dissertation 2.0. But there was so much pressure with dissertation 2.0 because it's like, I can't pivot again. I'm in like the 11th hour and I really need for things to pan out. And fortunately, things did. I think I resonate with what Nitya said, which is, I went to a program where we were encouraged to think really, really, really big and take risk. And so, of course, that's what I did. And so I had a really, really, really big study in my dissertation. For context, it was probably like a $5,000 or $6,000 study. And so all the other studies worked out, and I got to this study, and it was kind of a bust. So that also was disappointing because how do I navigate this on the market? Like, how do I navigate this in my job talk? What am I going to do here? And I think things generally panned out. But I'm even, 2-3 years removed from my dissertation and still like, well, what do I do with that? That study is a bust. And so I'll just add a couple of things here that I think people haven't mentioned thus far. For better or worse, a dissertation is one of several potential projects that you're going to be working on when you graduate. And I know there's a lot of pressure for it to be perfect, but technically, if you don't publish your dissertation, it's not the worst thing in the world. I'm in my role as a tenure track professor, have dozens of projects at various stages and stuff like that. Ideally, it's helpful if one or more of those are related to your dissertation because it's going to help a lot. But if it doesn't, there are other projects that you can pursue in lieu of that. So it's technically not the worst thing in the world. I just want to mention that to potentially alleviate some pressure that you might feel.
Yeah, I love that. Really great advice across the board. And I think one thing that kind of struck me was the variation in your experiences. There's a lot of commonalities, but some people did one, some people did three, some people approached it as extensions of what they were currently doing. Some people did it as a new pivot, some did a combination of it. So you can see that, the dissertation is very uh personal and subjective, and it kind of depends on your advisor, but having those clear, like thinking clearly about what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and doing that really in concert with your advisor seems to be a thread that I saw amongst all of you. So that's really helpful. So I wanted to take sort of the next step out of this question, but use this as a pivot of, people often think of, my dissertation is going to be my job market paper. And that's, that might be the default for some. It might not have been the default for your others. So I would love, before we start talking about preparing for the job market as a general idea, is, how did you see, or how did your advisor see the connection between your dissertation and your job market, either identity or paper generally? And Tosin, if you're all right, I might just go right back to you since you went fourth on the last round.
Sure. So I was in a situation where I only had two options. I mentioned this previously. I pursued various stuff in grad school. Those things didn't pan out. By the time I got to the market, I really had two options. There was option number one, which was my dissertation, and there was option number two. Now, being, the program that we're at Emory, we put a really, really, really big premium on novelty. And so before we collected this data that was a bust, my advisor was of the school of thought, your dissertation needs to be your job talk. And their feedback was, this other project is okay, but it's not as interesting, right? And I kind of leaned into that project a little bit because I was like, this is a $6,000 study on something that we haven't necessarily collected a ton of data on. We don't know if it's going to work out. So in the back of my mind, I was like, I kind of want to lean a little bit safer, but if it does work, this would be really, really great. And it would look really, really good on the market. Now, as it turns out, uncertainty got the better of us. And the study, the really big study, actually turned out to be a bust. So it was mixed results. And I did go on the market with my dissertation. So I had three experiments that showed a really compelling pattern of results. I had a really, really big $6,000 field study, and that was a bust. But I navigated it in a way that, I did the best I could. And I think that when I presented on the market, people were really, really fascinated by the idea, the phenomenon, the question. And I think because of the novelty, that did really kind of get me across the finish line. Because I think people were a little bit more understanding of mixed evidence for a very, very novel phenomenon as opposed to mixed evidence for something that's not that interesting, right? And so that's what I ended up doing on the market. But I think to the person who posed the question's point, you need something that's going to showcase your ability to do great research and ideally reflects your research identity as a scholar. That could be your dissertation. It could be something else. And it's a conversation to be had perhaps with your advisor and maybe others, but it technically doesn't have to be your dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that completely. And especially when you think about communicating about your dissertation on a job talk, at that point, the search committee knows what your research portfolio looks like. They've read your CV, they've had conversations with you, they've had a review of your research statement. So what I tend to approach dissertations for job talk purposes as a way of communicating that you can generate some idea that fits within your research portfolio and is also interesting and cool. And I think any idea can be interesting and cool based on how you communicate about it. My dissertation, I went on the market as I had two papers that I presented in my job talk, and then my dissertation was kind of like a tacked on at the end because I was collecting data. I collected data all the way until December, panicked over winter break, analyzed data, submitted my dissertation for review, and proposed like right before society collapsed in 2020. So when I was on the market, my idea for my dissertation was really more of a concept of a plan. I had some theory, I had some hypotheses, I had some ideas, but I didn't really have any data. So it was really on me to communicate, all right, like this is what I think I'm going to do. This is like something that drives from me personally. And I don't have my data yet, but I think it could be really interesting. And that's the approach that I took. And when I see job talks come through UTA, or when I saw job talks come through Memphis for folks that were ABD, I would say it's about a 50-50 shot that they had data for their dissertation by the time that they were presenting their job talk slides. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think you have to have like a full-fledged, this is the results, this is what everything is saying. But I do want to know if it's interesting. And I do want to know that you have a head around what it is that you're studying. One sort of last point on there is I want to know that your dissertation is yours. I think that it's really easy to tell when someone is presenting data that is their advisor's idea, or maybe it's like sort of a joint idea, but you're not really running the show. Like, I want to know that you are the one who's leading the charge here, because I want to see some evidence of an independent scholarship. And it could be sort of any idea under the sun. I am just as interested sometimes in strategy job talks as I am with OBHR job talks, as long as you can sort of sell me on the story. And I think that's most of what a job talk is just selling that you are an independent scholar that does some cool research.
Gonna jump in here. I think like where Dave ended is actually really important. You know, there's this is a really tricky question. And I think the reason that it's tricky is because there's no right answer, right? Everyone's situation is a little different. Some of this is dependent on what type of school you're targeting. But what's really critical is like if you take a couple steps back and you like bird's eye view this, right? What are you trying to convey through your job talk? And today's point, it is, are you an independent scholar? And how do you convey that you're an independent scholar? The ideas that you come up with, your ability to theorize, right? Like grounded theorizing in it could be inductive, could be deductive, that depends on the nature of the question that you're asking. And your ability to work with data and analyze data. And so if you start breaking it down in that way, I think that can actually help answer your question for you. So for instance, my data was not going to be we're not going to be fully collected by the time that I was on I was giving job talks. And so that meant that I had to be able to showcase my analytical skills in a different way. And so, you know, I also presented a paper that was an R&R going into a conditional accept that I was first on, and then my dissertation, with the idea being that across those 90 minutes, I was able to show that I know how to lead a paper that can receive an R&R at a top tier journal, but that showcases my methodological and my analytical skills, but that my independent scholarly identity can be informed through this dissertation idea that I don't yet have data for. And so if you're able to think about it in that way, I actually think it opens up more opportunities and in just different paths to success. Because, you know, data screw ups happen too. Sometimes your data source falls through, right? And just having more flexibility there, as long as you're able to think about how do I showcase my independent scholarly identity, I think can be really beneficial. And I've seen multiple job talks where sometimes it is just the dissertation that's being presented, sometimes it's a combination, sometimes it's only an R&R, but that was really that person's identifying work that they're first on, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I totally echo with other panelists' points. When I was on job market, my default was job market paper has to be your dissertation. But now I'm being assistant professor for 2 years, so we are kind of recruiting also in the past 2 years. So in the discussion we had, I feel like it's actually not always the case. It definitely varies a lot among different schools. Some schools prefer you have dissertation as your job talk. Some schools, they don't have such preferences. I mean, to me, I feel like ideal job market paper should look like this. So to signal your independence, to signal your intellectual leadership, ideally a job market paper should be one in which you are leading. You are leading the work, right? That's a strong signal. And ideally, as other panelists have mentioned, closely aligns with your research identity, right? Because they are going to remember your job talk. Your job talk ideally should reflect your identity, and ideally it's not published yet. It could be advanced R&R or initial R&R, but ideally it's not published, so that the audience will feel like their input will be useful. And ideally it's more advanced, so that you know what kind of question you are going to encounter, because if it's already been R&R stage, you got so many comments from the reviewers, those comments will likely be mentioned by the audience as well. Those comments help you. So first author, align with identity, a little bit more advanced, and non-published. I guess that's probably the idea and job on paper from my perspective.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think that what's great is we again saw the range of things of dissertation with all the studies collected, or some of them, to partially collected, to not even having your dissertation be the only thing that you present. Hopefully that helps lessen some of the pressure that your dissertation has to be the one complete perfect thing for the job market, because we have 4 scholars who are very successful who had a range of experiences related to that. So I wanted to take the next step and get more into the job market piece. So again, given that we're at the halfway there, we don't want to talk about, actually navigating the job market itself. What we want to focus on is, preparing for the job market. How might people think about who's involved? What are the types of materials that they need to think about? How long does it take? Starting to open the black box for some of our audience who maybe they're, already finishing their 3rd year, and now they're starting to think of like, what do I need to do to be ready when I come on the job market in the 4th year or the 5th year, depending on, the program that they're at. So I might come back to Rui to see if you'll kick us off of, thinking about preparing for the job market, what advice, insights, either from your experiences or from others that you've seen.
My advice is very simple, and trying to push forward your project and try to get something published or submitted published. That's, I feel out of the 3rd year, I personally feel it's too early to think about the job market. I feel the job market, the most fundamental piece is your research, is your publication, is your honors. So I guess in your 2nd, 3rd year, I feel the priority should be work on your research, should be push forwards, and your project should be get something submitted and ideally accepted. And I know a lot of folks will think about, okay, now it's time to think about their research identity. To me, that's also seems to be too early, because oftentimes we do research, we get something published, and then we come back to craft our research identity. So identity is sometimes it's based on the publication you have, instead of, okay, I'm interested in this, I want to do this, okay, that's my identity, I only focus on research on those areas. That's like the ideal case, but actually it's not always works like that, at least from my perspective. I mean, in my first few years, I dived into different areas. I ended up focusing on the gossip, abuse situation, because those projects got published, and I craft my identity based on those publications. I guess, yeah, the message is to kind of work on your research, work on your publication, work on your projects.
I can go next. Oh, go ahead, Tosin.
There, you got it.
The unmute game. I agree. I think that, I'll start with the identity piece. I do think it's a little early. I also think identity is ever evolving. I feel like my identity has changed after after I graduated and over the course of my 5 years as an assistant professor. And so I say that to hopefully take away a little bit of the anxiety associated with forming identity. Like, again, that felt, I don't know, it's just very overwhelming for me, because I'm like, who do I want to be when I grow up? But also growing up is a process, and I am also interested in a lot of different things. And so if you can kind of take the stress out of that a little bit, I think that's helpful. I like the piece about, again, kind of early thinking about the job market, but try and set yourself up for success on the job market. And I really want you to think of that broadly. So what I mean by that is if you want to be at an R1 institution, setting yourself up for success is a pipeline of research papers, right? Moving them along as you can, doing some good lead first author work. If you want to be at a balanced school, maybe setting yourself up for success is picking up another class or two, right? And really honing your teaching skills. And so think about this process. I mean, it is so freeing in a good way, in a scary way, because you don't have a ton of structure, right? Considering that you're not taking classes anymore. You have so much more autonomy. And so how do you use this time to develop the skills that are going to be important for you long term? And that, again, is so varied and so personal, and so institution dependent as well in many cases. And so that's kind of where I would focus right now. And like, for me, what was really important was like loving the work part of it, like like figuring out the intrinsic motivation part, and really um enjoying it, because I think that sustains you through the stresses of the dissertation, the stresses of the job market, and the stresses of the tenure track, to be really honest. So like, just how do you set yourself up for success professionally, personally, holistically?
I love this thought on thinking ahead and trying to set yourself up. Thinking about my own experience in my own program, I'll share, I think, maybe two things that I think could be really helpful. The first is, even though you're in potentially year 2 or year 3, I would strongly encourage you to get lots of practice writing. One of the reasons why I say that is because, and I say this as someone who served on search committees now, when you read someone's work or you listen to them present it, if you pay close attention, you can tell someone who's thought really, 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 really deeply about whatever their thing is versus someone who's been working on it for writing it maybe for the last couple of months or something like that. And so I think the goal for everyone, to the extent, maybe they're trying to pursue more research-oriented opportunities, you want to make sure you get lots of practice thinking deeply about your work and learning how to communicate your work in really crystal clear ways. And for my own program at Emory, like, writing was kind of the last stage of the process. And so I told you a lot of my projects were a bust, so I didn't get there. And then all of a sudden I'm on the market and it's like, I need a really, 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 really good job market paper, but I haven't been practicing and nurturing that skill of writing. And so if I could go back, I would delve into that sooner and a lot more consistently. So that's one thought, and I think it's really practical. The second is kind of related to it. I would get practice presenting your work. And when I say presenting, I'm not talking about a 10-minute presentation at AOM or a 15-minute talk at PsyOp. I don't have anything against those, but that's not really a good preview of what it's like to present on the market. I'm talking about those internal brown bags with your classmates and your faculty members, where there's a back and forth about questions and comments, and you need to think on your feet. Like, those are actually the most valuable for getting a preview of the market. An AOM talk is not going to give you a good preview. A PsyOp talk, not going to give you a good preview. I don't have anything against those. Those are great for visibility. But if you really want to get practice articulating your work orally and responding real time in the moment, do those internal brown bags. If your department doesn't have one, maybe suggest that to a faculty member or an advisor and say, hey, I think this would be really good for me. Or even say, if nobody else wants this, I want to present a project. Can I get something on the calendar, and can we, get me some feedback or something like that? Those two things, I think, will help you prepare yourself really well for the market. So now you're doing your talk at, your dream school, and you're ready to communicate your work in a really crystal clear way.
Yeah, I co-sign most of everything that's said. This is the function of going last, right? So I think there's a couple pieces that I'll co-sign, and then one sort of extra note that I don't think has been said yet. Something that Nitya said around your research identity. Not one single person is going to go back to the research statement that you wrote on the job market when you go up for tenure, when you go up for your third year review. Your identity is going to change, and no one's going to hold you accountable to say, well, you said your future research direction was going this way, and now you're not doing that. It's just not something that happens in a sensible reality, at least not one that I'm living in. I've been on almost every search committee that we've had at UTA since I joined. I'm leading a search for an OBHR position this year. And it's just not something that we talk about internally, at least at my institution. Something else, I completely agree with Tosin's point that a SIOP presentation and an AOM presentation does not prepare you for a job talk. Job talks are marathons. It is an hour to 90 minutes of playing cognitive table tennis with 13 to 30 people. And there's going to be questions. People are going to interrupt you. You're going to get questions that are completely out of whack. Everybody has a job market experience that they come back to. I'd be happy to litigate mine one day for all of you. But I do think you need to have those tougher, longer, more arduous presentation experiences to get you set up for what that's going to look like. The last thing, something that hasn't really been said yet, what was really helpful for me as someone who like lives and breathes and dies by structure is I worked backwards. My program was 4 years at Memphis. When I got through my comprehensive exams, I was standing at August of my third year. I said, all right, in 24 months, I need to have a job. So what do I need to do to be able to get to there from right here? And something that a mentor of mine said that really stuck with me is she asked me what I wanted and how it was different from what I needed out of a position. And that really stuck with me. Like I knew that I needed to be in a city with an airport. I knew I needed to be in a university that would value my research. I wanted to have research funding. I wanted to have a certain teaching load, but I was willing to be more flexible about some of those things if it was a job that I felt like I could be really successful in. I think it's really helpful to start thinking about what you want and what you need earlier on because it helps you avoid a mistake that I made on the job market where I applied to a ton of universities that I had no business applying to, that were not what I wanted, that were completely out of pocket. They were still doing AOM interviews when I was on the market. I went on 26 of them, which was a nightmare. Please do not do that to yourself. I was crawling back to my hotel room afterwards. And a lot of those conversations, it was really apparent very early on in the conversation that I wasn't going to be a good fit for what they were looking for. So definitely be honest with yourself and think to the future and try and work backwards from there. That was really helpful for me.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I need to think about my needs and wants even though I have a job. I think that's just a good thing for us all to reflect on a lot. So that I'm going to think about that a lot. That's really great advice, and I appreciate you sharing that. So we're getting close to the end, so we're going to do one more bigger question, and we'll do a rapid fire lightning round to end on a high note. So I'm going to pair our last big question as whether from your own experiences or what you've seen with your students or other students, what are some of the most common mistakes that PhD students make as they're doing this halfway there transition, as they're coming out of the comps prelims into the sort of unstructured time? We've touched on a little bit, but I wanted to, put a point on, what are the biggest mistakes or biggest things that you see people do? But then I want to, make this tactical and practical of, given that, what is something that our audience can do, over the next 6 months to try to not make those mistakes, something tangible that they can do or start doing in order to make that transition more seamlessly. And so Dave, because you went last on the last round, I'm going to start with you. Mistake and then something practical that someone can start doing.
I was ready for you this time. So
Great.
yeah. I mean, I think it's something that I've already said. I think that the transition from pre-comps to post-comps gives you a lot of autonomy, which I think is a really great thing. And I've seen a lot of students get tripped up over having those big stretches of time. So having a conversation with your advisor, having a conversation with other people in your program around how they structure their week, structure their days, I think that's something that I would encourage all of you to do. Talk to the people that are at later stages in your program, talk to the assistant professors in your department, the assistant professors out of your department around what they do, because that autonomy doesn't go away. I think what they say about academia is we get to choose which 80 hours a week that we work. And I think that the way that you structure that 80 hours is really important and something that you should try and instill as quickly as possible once you get that autonomy. The other mistake that I tend to see people make when it comes to dissertations is either doing something that is too narrow or too big. I think that there's a beauty in something that sort of exists in the middle, something that is both comprehensive but also directive. And I know that that's kind of a fluffy, unreachable sentence to get to, but I would encourage you to take a step back and look at your dissertation model at some point during the first semester that you're really thinking about it and think to yourself, is this feasible? And if I send this to a journal, are they going to come back and say, well, this is an incremental contribution? And I know those are tough conversations to have, and you should have those with your mentors and people that are willing to give you direct and clear feedback. But those are the two things that came to mind for me.
Awesome. Who wants to jump in next?
Right. I could do that. Okay. I guess so at this stage, I feel like students are beginning to submit their papers to journals, and one common experience and a stressful experience is getting rejection. I got quite a few rejections in my first few submissions. One mistake I made was to blame myself too much. Without realizing actually the research and the publication process is pretty random, and it oftentimes has something to do with being lucky, right? Getting the right reviewers, getting the right editor, or just the reviewer happen to know your topic, happen to know all the things, happen to like the topic. So probably one thing to avoid making the mistake is to realize the fact that hard work and being hardworking is important, but it is not the only factor. Right? Publication tends to be pretty random. There are a lot of things that are beyond our control, beyond your control. And so being compassionate towards yourself, try not to be too hard on yourself is critical. And also because how random publication is, being persistent, being resilient is also very important. So oftentimes a paper may not land a journal, land a place until you try different journals. So so try to be persistent and try to maybe submit the same paper to different not simultaneous, but just after rejection. Don't blame yourself too hard, and make revisions and try to submit to another journal, and realizing actually publication is random and there's a lot of factors beyond your control.
I think this is all really great feedback. Maybe I'll just very quickly share. I think that one mistake that I see people or maybe students make is starting a lot of different things, like maybe too many different things. And I think it's hard because you see people do talks at your school, and it has all these publications, and Roy and Dave, and it's like, well, how do I get there? I know I'm going to start like 11 different projects, and you know, that will help me get there. That's not a good idea. And I tell students, maybe this isn't politically correct. I think at the earliest point in the program, you're probably going to do some of your worst work. And later on in the program is probably when you're going to do some of your best work. You're kind of at the middle point, right? So if you start like 11 different things, it may not be playing to the opportunity that you have to leverage your expertise and skill set and experience a little bit later in the process. I think 2 really solid projects in year 3 is better than 6 shaky so-so projects, right? So I think we have to kind of shift our mindset on how we're evaluating progress and potential. Sometimes less is more. So try and find 1, maybe 2 really solid projects and maybe focus your attention on those. And then I would say just take advantage of opportunities to get feedback on your work. So yes.
This is a hard question, and I think what I have might do a good job of summarizing what you've heard from, and I, really appreciate the experiences shared by all the other three panelists, and maybe also offer something to think about. The biggest pitfall, which I definitely fell into, was being so outcome oriented and focusing on what my CV was going to look like on the market. I became so obsessed with the number of publications that I was going to need. And, like, how do I position myself to get a really good R1 job that that when the rejections came, because of course they did, that is a part and parcel of our field, they crushed me. I had such a hard time motivating myself in my third year after a string of rejections. And I've had a string of rejections this year. And I think that having had those experiences in my PhD program better set me up for coping with rejections now, because what I realized in my third year and going into my fourth year was that I really needed to find my why and my joy in this career. And if I could find those two things, I could cope with the rejections. I could be motivated to pick up wherever I left off, no matter how stupid an idea a reviewer thought I had, or anything like that. And so, as you get out of a structured environment of classes and working with your advisor on projects, really, I hope you spend time in the next 2 years cultivating that joy for our job and finding where it lies, right? And maybe it lies in multiple publications at an R1 institution. Maybe it lies in educating the next generation of business leaders. Maybe it lies in between the two, right? And that's okay. All of those are important paths to success. Figuring that out and then finding the non-negotiable well-being parts of yourself that will help you sustain through the rejections. They'll keep you confident, will keep you going. I think is going to serve you long term. And just, this career is long, it's lumpy, it is unfair, and just keeping motivated and remembering the why, I think, makes a really, really big difference.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a great note to end on, and I really appreciate both the identifying the pitfalls, but the very practical and sort of hopeful things that people can start doing in this very uncertain period that they're entering. So for the last little bit of the panel, I mentioned we're going to do a brief lightning round. So this is just a few short questions. You can answer in 1, 2, maybe 3 words if you're feeling really generous. But I'm just going to throw this around. You can pop in. I won't pick on any of you. You can jump in whenever you're so inspired to answer the questions. So first question is, what is your favorite place to write? Or where is your favorite place to write?
Outside of my house. That was 4 words. Sorry, my God.
I
can't write.
It's like my home office. I'm such an introvert.
In my work office.
My home office.
All right. It's been interesting across these sessions seeing there's such wide variation of where people like to write. One session, they were all at home. No one liked to work in their office. All right. Next up, what was the most prominent emotion you felt while you were dissertating?
There's a story to this, but it was anger.
Mine also kind of anger and despair, but for very specific reasons that we're not allowed to far.
Yeah, I'll triple threat that. It was frustration.
Yeah, mine was actually pride. Partly because my advisor was supportive of my research. She was always very positive on me. So that's why it gave me a sense of pride.
Oh, wait, can I add that anger and despair was not towards my advisor, but towards the person?
We are recording, so good to clarify
this is being recorded.
Me neither.
Yeah, again, interesting variation. This one, Rui saved us by having a positive emotion, and one of them, everyone was super positive, and I was like, I don't know, like I liked my dissertation, but it was a lot of ups and downs. All right, so this obviously a spin-off of AOM, but I'm curious, what is your favorite non-AOM conference?
Scion, definitely.
I,
I'm still exploring.
All right,
Yeah.
I like SPSP.
SBSP. Yeah, all right. Good good relation of IO, some social psych oriented answers as well. And then we'll end with this one. So we had asked the question in terms of your job market, but given we're, leading up into people potentially going to AOM in person, what's one not so obvious item that you recommend people packing in their suitcase as they head off to a big academic conference?
stain remover wipes.
Stain remover.
Tylenol, ibuprofen.
Hmm.
Maybe a speaker.
A speaker?
Yeah, vibes.
Controller, I guess. I don't know. I tend to use my own controller when I present. That give me some kind of familiarity with the setting.
Yeah, I carry one with me as well. I love that. Good range of answers there. So I will end the panel there. So thank you so much to all of you for your insights, ranging from, very honest and transparent to hopeful, practical. I think we got the big range of things that I think will be really helpful for the audience here. So I will personally thank you, but also I know our audience thanks you for all of the insight that you have provided. So we really appreciate it. So I am now going to hand things off to my co-organizer, Edwina, who's going to introduce how the breakout rooms are going to go. So I think all of our panelists, except for Tosin, who has to hop off, will be sticking around for the breakout room. So if you have specific questions for any of our panelists, you can feel free to join their breakout rooms, but I'll let Edwina give the rest of the details on the breakout rooms here. Thanks, y'all.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Can everyone hear me well? Okay, great. My AirPods have a mind of their own, so hopefully you'll continue to hear me. Edwina, great to see you all here this afternoon. So again, thank you to our wonderful panelists for sharing your insights and your time with us. For the next 50 minutes or so, we'll engage in what we call our roundtable sessions, aka breakout rooms. So each roundtable or breakout room will be hosted by one of our esteemed scholars. So that will include our panelists, as well as other recent graduates who have joined us today. So we should have a slide that displays each of the breakout rooms. And we've named the breakout rooms in Zoom by the person who's hosting them. So you can select whichever room you want for this first round. The first round will be 25 minutes. And so you can join whichever room you like. And then after about 25 minutes, we'll send out a blast message to let you know that it's time to rotate to your second room. And so our roundtable or breakout room hosts will stay in the room that they're in. So you all, our hosts, will not move. The students, however, will rotate after the 25-minute mark. So just 2 rounds of 25 minutes. We encourage all of our students to have your cameras on and speak up, ask questions. Everyone is here to share their insights and their experiences and their advice with you. So please take advantage. I think that is it. So go ahead and take a look at the roundtables or the breakout rooms listed on the screen. We've also listed everyone's current institution as a faculty member, as well as where they earn their PhD, if that helps you make a decision about what rooms you'd like to visit. All right. So, and great note from Lauren. Thank you for adding that. Our roundtable rooms are not recorded. So please feel free to be vulnerable to the degree that you feel comfortable in that smaller setting. All right. So you all can go ahead. I think the breakout rooms are open now. And so you can go ahead and start selecting your rooms and get started. Welcome back, everyone. So just before we wrap up, a few things. On behalf of my co-organizers, Bailey, Ben, and Lauren, thank you again to our panelists and roundtable hosts. We really appreciate you sharing your time and your insights with us. Thank you so much. And then, of course, thank you to all of the students who were in attendance today. Thank you so much. We hope that you gained a lot from all of the insights that were shared and all of the wisdom and experiences. And hopefully you'll be able to reflect on what you heard here today and even what you heard on Monday in the opening plenary to consider how you can implement some of the things that you heard into your own plans and help shape your own academic journey. So before we wrap up, two announcements. The first is about our in-person Halfway There networking event that will take place at AOM 2025. So we mentioned in the opening plenary that we were trying to get a larger venue so that we could accommodate more than 30 people, which was what we originally stated in the registration. And so we are happy to announce that we were able to secure a larger venue that will allow us to accommodate more of you. So we encourage and invite you all to attend if you will be in Copenhagen. The in-person networking will take place on Tuesday, July 29th from 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. at the Bella Center in Copenhagen. The room information is on the slide. We'll also have light refreshments, cookies, fruit, juice, all that kind of stuff. So this session is really, the in-person networking is intended for you all to get the opportunity to meet each other in person and to start building those relationships with the people that will be at a similar stage of their PhD journey, and then hopefully form relationships that will last into and through your career. So please plan to attend that. We look forward to seeing you there. And then the second and final announcement is about our survey. So as Lauren mentioned in the opening plenary, this is the first time that we've done Halfway There in this format with the virtual sessions and the regional sessions. So we'd really love to hear from each of you feedback about what went well and maybe what changes you'd like to see in the future. So please use the QR code on the screen, or you can use that link that is displayed to access the wrap-up survey and give us some feedback about your online Halfway There experience. Also, along with that, the opening plenary session, as well as each of the panel sessions from the 3 different regional sessions were recorded, including today's panel session. And so those recordings will be made available. I think the opening plenary is already available along with the other 2 regional sessions. And so this one will become available. We'll send out an email at some point within the next week or so with links to the recordings as well as the link to the survey. So please be on the lookout for that. And I think that is everything. Lauren, Ben, anything else? All right, well, thank you all again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in Copenhagen.